Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei Heartbroken and met female Vali part 2. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow this xBrawlx for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Issei and his team were exasperated as they were waiting for Kyoto, who was already an hour late from the initial time he said he would meet them. Right now they were still in the main hall of the Hero Faction's HQ, which was where they would usually get briefed about their upcoming missions. They were all silently waiting before it was broken by Kuroka, who was seemingly not quite happy about the delay. "When I see Kyoto, I swear to God that I will make sure he will not be able to get any girl pregnant," Kuroka said with a devilish smile, as her dark aura started to flood the room, which made all the boys shudder when they heard what she said, making them put their hands on their crotch in a defending manner. "Kuroka-sama, please calm down. I am sure that Kyoto-sama has a good reason for being late," Lefei, who seemed not to be bothered by Kyoto's delay, told Kuroka in her kind and tender voice, which managed to calm the black Nekashu for the meantime. "Fine, but he better have a good reason or else," Kuroka replied with slightly less ire, as her dark aura started to calm down, which made the boys sigh in relief as they released their hands from their crotch. Lefei was about to respond when the doors to the main hall suddenly opened, revealing the long-awaited Kyoto entering the room with a blonde woman by his side, which raised Issei cock his eyebrow in curiosity, as he did not recognize the woman. From what he could see, she had blonde, smooth hair that reached her middle back. She also had black eyes and an average-sized bust. Her clothes were made of a very short purple skirt that reached her knees, and a black sleeveless shirt which Issei assumed after catching sight of her rapier was done to reduce the potential restrictions her clothes could provide to her when she uses her rapier. He looked at her before he spotted something coming from her right shoulder, and upon focusing on it, his eyes widened when he realized that this was the grip of the same sword he and his team stole from the Gregory's lab a few weeks ago. "Hello everyone, sorry that I'm late," Kyoto said as he and the blonde girl neared the group. "The FF took you long enough," Kuroka said with venom in her voice that made Kyoto flinch, as he already knew from past experience what it was like to make the black Nekashu angry. "I am sorry for the delay. I was waiting for Jean to arrive, which took longer than I initially expected," Kyoto said, as he pointed to the girl who was now known as Jean. "Hello, everyone. I am Jean, and I am going to join you in your next mission," Jean introduced herself as she had a wide grin on her face. "It's nice to meet you, Jean-sama. My name is Lefei, and this over there is my brother Arthur," Lefei replied with a sincere smile as she introduced herself and her brother, happy that she got to know yet another friend. He said, "My name's Biku Biku," while giggling as he flipped his golden staff, as if showing off to the blonde girl who seemed unfazed by it, making Arthur laugh slightly. "I'm Vali Lucifer, and this is my rival Issei Haidu." Vali introduced both herself and Issei as she got closer to Jean to shake her hand while dragging Issei with her. "Hi," Issei said shyly as he scratched the back of his head while holding his gaze on the ground, while Vali shook Jean's hand, who silently asked Vali what is wrong with Issei, to which she replied that it's a long and complicated story which she should let Issei tell if he wants, before gazing at him while having a sincere smile on her face. Issei for his part was still not ready for this. He was just finished getting used to being with his team, who after 3 weeks looked to be harmless, but you could never know, as he remembered that even Rias and the girls who he was with for a few months at that time ended up breaking his heart. Sure, he had an affection towards Kuroka and Vali, as well as having a deep desire to protect Lefei after sensing her aura that showed how pure and kind-hearted she was, but regardless, that didn't mean that he trusted them completely, let alone act on his affection, as he still did not know them very well. For example, he did not know anything about Vali's past, except the fact that Azazel took her under his care for some unknown reason. He also did not know what Lefei's past had been like before she and Arthur joined the Hero Faction. He was aware that it would still take quite some time until he completely trusts Vali, Kuroka, and Lefei, but he was on his way to that, which comforted him a bit, as he knew that he still had hope that this time, things will be different than how they were with Rias and the rest. Hoping with every fiber of his being that the heartbreak he experienced that night will not be repeated, as he knew that his heart and mind would not be able to take that blow once again. He was brought off his train of thoughts as he heard Arthur ask the same question he had in his mind that he didn't dare ask. "How come she has the sword we stole from the Gregory a few weeks ago?" Arthur asked Kyoto after taking notice of the familiar grip. "Well, to answer your question, Jean is a very talented swordswoman, and I am sure that she will make great use of this sword for our cause," Kyoto explained with a bit of pride at the talent the blonde possessed. Kyoto was very proud of his members, who were deemed to be very strong, as they all had a sacred gear or longinus, which meant that they had a great and unique power to each one of them. He just hoped that his pride wouldn't be let down. I see, Arthur replied with a neutral voice which seemed to satisfy Cao Cao as he thought to himself, why did he get the sword, since he as well was a very experienced swordsman, but he shrugged it off knowing that he still had his two very powerful swords, the Excalibur ruler and the Caliburn. Cough cough. Okay, now that we got the familiarities out of the way, we should now discuss your upcoming mission, Cao Cao said, after making everyone focus on him, so he could start to brief the team on their upcoming mission, which seemed to work nicely as everyone averted their look towards the raven-haired human. Your mission will take place in Kyoto where the Yaokai community lives. Your mission will be to subdue the Yaokai leader, Yasaka, so we could use her power to open the dragon gate, so we could summon Great Red, Cao Cao said, which was followed by gasps from both Vali and Issei, who were quite familiar with Great Red. Great Red, why do we need him? Vali asked in bewilderment as she thought about the legendary true dragon, who was the one she desired the most to defeat, so she could become the true white dragon empress. I cannot tell you about Vali, but I ask you to trust me as your leader, Cao Cao said with a tad of irritation as he felt that Vali was doubting his decisions and therefore his leadership. Vali for her part did not respond to Cao Cao as she knew that by doing it she would just get into a useless argument with the raven-haired boy, so she shrugged it off and waited for him to continue, which he did after seeing that Vali did not respond. Capturing her is going to be hard as she is very loved within the Yaokais, meaning they will put their lives on the line in order to protect her, so you can expect resistance as well as potential intervention of the three factions, who probably learned about our intentions of capturing her, Cao Cao told them, to which they frowned as they thought about the amount of fighting they would have to do. Is there any way to capture her with as fewer casualties as possible? Arthur asked as he too was not keen on the upcoming fighting which he deemed unnecessary. I do not care how you capture her, as long as you succeed, Cao Cao deadpanned, while glaring at Arthur, who stepped down in response. Now then, you should all go prepare for the upcoming mission, as it will take you quite some time to complete it, Cao Cao said, before turning around to leave the room. Good luck everyone, and you better not disappoint me, he said without turning his head as he stood at the entrance of the main hall. What the hell happened to him? Biku asked as he and his team gazed on the entrance to the main hall shortly after Cao Cao left. They all noticed how different the raven-haired human behaved, which made them confused as to what exactly happened that could make him change his behavior like that. I guess he just had a bad day or something, Arthur replied as he too was wondering what happened to Cao Cao, but he came up with no reasonable explanation other than him having a bad day. As long as it's not going to be permanent, I don't care, Vali interjected before telling her team to go and pack for the mission, before meeting again at the main hall in an hour, to which they all compiled without resistance. Jean was about to leave the main hall as well before she felt a hand on her shoulder, making her turn around to see Vali looking at her with an intimidating look, making her gulp. I don't really know you, but if you even dare to betray us, I am going to make sure you will regret this for the rest of your life, Vali warned as she released a fraction her powers in order to scare the blonde so she could see how serious she was, which seemed to work perfectly as she saw the frightened look she had on her face. Oh okay Vali-chan, Jean said, making Vali release her before she bolted out of the room, as she wouldn't have to spend more time with Vali than necessary after witnessing what she just did, making Vali smirk in amusement before she as well left the main hall in order to prepare for the mission. With Issei. Issei was in his room packing his stuff for the upcoming mission with Jean and his team, but during his preparation, he could not shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen in this mission, no matter how hard he tried to suppress those thoughts. Partner, are you okay? Drake asked within Issei's mind after sensing the brunette's distress. Sigh. I suppose I just can't stop thinking that this mission will go south one way or another, which makes me nervous, Issei confessed to his partner. During those 3 weeks, Issei and Drake got even closer than they usually did as Issei learned to share his feelings and thoughts with the dragon, who seemed to always have a solution for it, which he greatly appreciated, as well as Drake being delighted by Issei's change from the breast-loving pervert, but also feeling pity for the boy whose heart got broken just because he tried to fix another. Which infuriated him to no end as he got a grim reminder of how the supernaturals behaved during his and his past possessor's time. I am sure that everything is going to be okay, partner, but in case something does indeed go wrong, you always have your team to help you, Drake said, voicing his opinion as he tried to reassure the boy that everything will be fine, even if things did go bad. I guess, but I don't think that I can still trust them completely. Especially when my life is on the line, Issei said, making Drake to sigh. Sigh. I know, a partner, but eventually you will have to entrust them with your life like they entrust theirs with you right now, Drake told Issei, who frowned in response. You think they trust me with their lives? Issei asked in skepticism after hearing what the dragon said. I am sure that they do, but gladly they didn't get into a situation that forced them to, Drake interjected, making the boy shrug it off as he realized that the dragon had a point. I guess you're right. Of course I'm right. The Red Dragon of Domination is never wrong, Drake said in pride as he remembered his life as the Dragon of Domination and the fear the people had when they heard his name, which came to show how honorable and feared he was. Maybe the Red Dragon of Domination is never mistaken, but you are not him anymore. Now you are known as the Breast Dragon Emperor, Issei teased with a smug grin on his face as he snickered at his partner before he heard sobbing coming from within his subconscious. Stupid pervert, how dare you remind me of that horrible title. Drake said between sobs, which made Issei laugh before he relented into comforting his partner. Don't worry, Drake, I promised you that I would make the people recognize us as the Dragon of Domination, and I will keep that promise. Thanks, Issei, I knew I could trust you, Drake said with sheer happiness as he believed in Issei's promise, which meant that finally, he would get rid of that disgraceful title. But Vali was in her room preparing for the upcoming mission as she thought about a certain brunette which seemed to be constantly on her mind for the past few weeks. During those 3 weeks, her feelings for Issei increased substantially to the point that she couldn't even take her mind off of him for more than a minute. She remembered what they've been through ever since she first met him and how their relationship evolved during this time. Their meeting when she took xBrawlx, who got defeated by the Gremory peerage, to Azazel so he could be held account for his betrayal. The events that happened in the three factions meeting where she first witnessed the determination Issei had, which eventually made her develop feelings for the boy who loathed her at the time for trying to kill his friends. During the whole time, she thought Issei was weak and not worthy of being the Red Dragon Emperor, but after he had joined the hero faction where she got to know him more, she found that he was far from being weak as she saw how broken he was, yet he tried his best to recover without giving up. She thought of their fight with Dulio and Tobio back when they stole that artificial sacred gear from the Gregory's lab, and she remembered how strong Issei was and how he put his life on the line so hers and the rest would be safe. She also remembered the monsters which she probably couldn't defeat alone, although she wouldn't admit it being destroyed by Issei alone. She smirked upon reminiscing on those moments before a certain incident entered her mind, which made her smile as her cheeks became flushed. She remembered that time when she trained in order to improve her strength so she could use the new mode Office helped her achieve. She remembered how Issei looked at her with his mesmerizing eyes and other parts that showed the sheer amounts of affection and surprise upon seeing her. She remembered how nervous and flushed he was when they talked, which made her overjoyed as she came to know of the affection the brunette had to her. I've never seen you like this, Vali. Who would have thought that the mighty battle maniac Vali would eventually be replaced with the girl who fell in love with her rival, Albion said in sarcasm as he teased his partner, who had her blush intensify in return. Shut up. She exclaimed in aggravation at the dragon's antics. Hahaha. Seriously though, Vali, I've never seen you like this, and to be honest, I am very glad about what you became, Albion confessed, which surprised Vali, who now had wide eyes. Really, Vali asked in bewilderment, still disbelieving what the dragon said as she thought that he was probably pulling a prank on her again. Yeah, you improved for the better as you finally changed from the cold-hearted person who was only interested in fights to a real girl who got her heart captured by a boy. I am glad to finally see you like that, especially after what you've been through, Albion said with pride aimed at his partner, after thinking about the massive change she did and how she managed to recover from the cruel past that made her be the same cold-hearted battle maniac person she was before she fell for Issei. Thanks, Albion. I appreciate it a lot, Vali said in gratitude while flashing a big grin. Somewhere far away, a certain red-haired girl was sitting at her desk with a frown on her face after she got a call from her brother, who asked her and her violet-eyed best friend to go to Kyoto with their peerages after rumors about an upcoming attack from the hero faction. Right now she and her best friend along with their respective peerages were present in the room, waiting for the red-haired girl to tell them what the call she received from her brother was about, which judging from the red-haired reaction was not something good. Okay, listen up everyone. My brother asked for us to travel to Kyoto in order to defend the outcase from a potential attack from the hero faction. The red-haired girl said, which was received with frowns by those who were present in the room. We will meet here tomorrow morning before we leave to Kyoto by a magic circle, so be ready by then, she said, to which everyone nodded before leaving to get ready for their trip to Kyoto. What they didn't know was that a certain brunette they were all very familiar with was also making his way to Kyoto with the very same hero faction they were asked to defend against. Surzich's Lucifer was sitting at his desk and sorting out paperwork regarding the affairs of the underworld and the three factions, like he would always do ever since he became a Mao. His wife, Grafia, was standing by his side with her hands crossed in front of her as she silently waited for her husband to request her assistance. Surzich's was about to sign the last 3 papers when a magic circle suddenly appeared by his ear, making him surprised at the unexpected call. Yes? He asked as he waited for the person on the other side of the magic circle to start speaking, but never did he expect to hear his sister talking to him while she sounded like she was sobbing badly. "Oh Ani-sama, I am so sorry to bother you, but there's something that I need to tell you as soon as possible." Surziches managed to understand from his sister between her sobs, his power of destruction starting to flare up as he was starting to feel anger and concern before he was calmed down by Grafia, who warned him that if he continues to unleash his powers like that, then he will destroy the room. Angry that his precious little sister was hurt by something or someone while being concerned about the urgent thing she said she had to talk to him about, which judging by experience would not be something to look forward to. "Riatan, it's okay, please calm down. I'll send Grafia over to bring you and your peerage here as soon as possible." Surziches tried to reassure his sister, who seemed to work as he heard Rias starting to sob less than when she first called. "Oh okay, Ani-sama. Thank you," she said before she hung up the call, leaving a very perplexed and worried Surziches and Grafia. "Darling, what do you think might have happened to cause Rias-sama to break down like that?" Grafia asked in concern as she frowned, worrying for her sister-in-law who she grew to love and care for deeply ever since she married her brother. Grafia and Ria's relationship was not always fine like it is now. When Grafia and Surziches first got married, Rias was very suspicious of the silver-haired girl's intentions and her true feelings towards her brother, since she knew their history as former enemies and the fact that her brother was very popular among the girls of the underworld because of his title as the Mau. But as time went by, Grafia did her very best to prove to the red-haired girl, who was becoming less wary of her as time went on, that she could indeed be trusted and that she will not disappoint her or her brother. Eventually, Grafia and Rias became very close, even to the point where they confided in each other their personal problems such as relationship issues. "I don't know, but from how Riatan sounded, then it's certainly not something that we should look forward to," Surziches said while matching his wife's frown as he thought about what could have possibly made his precious little sister to behave like this. He swore that if he finds who or whatever did this to her, it will not remain long in this world after he's done taking care of it. "Grafia, can you please go to Kyoto where Rias and her peerage are and bring them here?" Surziches asked his wife, who nodded in agreement before she formed a silver magic circle that will take her to where Rias and the others were currently at. When Grafia arrived at where Rias and her peerage were, she was shocked when she saw that it was not only Rias who was broken, and rather it was the entire peerage who were like that. She looked around to scan for those who were present before she cocked an eyebrow in curiosity when she didn't spot a certain brunette. "Everyone, are you okay? Please tell me what happened." Grafia asked the sobbing girls, but to her dismay the girls did not seem to even hear her question as the voices of their sobs flooded the room. "Udo-kun, can you please tell me what has happened?" Grafia asked as she turned to the blonde who leaned against the wall with a grim expression on his face as he was deep in thoughts. "Issei-kun," Kiba replied, which made Grafia to frown as she realized that the brunette was the source of the mayhem, but her frown intensified as she thought about what could have happened to Issei that will make them act like that. Was he hurt? Was he kidnapped, or worse, was he killed? Were the thoughts that ran through the silver-haired girl's head as she tried to come up with her own conclusion as to what happened to the brunette after seeing that she would not get a proper explanation from anyone in the room. She eventually shrugged it off and decided that she should just escort them to her husband's office, where she hoped they would explain everything that happened. "Rias-sama and everyone else, I came to escort you to Surziches-sama office, so if you would please come near me so I could teleport us all back to his office," Grafia asked, to which they all complied to, before Grafia teleported them back to Surziches' office, where he was impatiently waiting for her return. Surziches was pacing back and forth in his office as he waited for his wife to bring his Riatan and her peerage to his office, when suddenly a bright light erupted in his room, signaling the return of Grafia with the addition of his sister and her peerage. "Riatan, are you okay? You really worried me," he frantically asked as he saw his little sister appearing in his office. He frowned upon taking a closer look at Ria and her peerage, which he saw were sobbing like Ria's did, while Kiba just stood there with a scowl on his face. "What is wrong with Riatan? What happened that caused you and your peerage to act like that?" Surziches asked as his concern for his sister increased when he saw how her peerage was. Surely this wasn't a small thing if everyone in the peerage seemed to be affected by it. Rias just stared at her brother while she tried to compose herself enough to tell him what happened. "Ayus is dead. We found his evil pieces at a ruined shrine in Kyoto after he ran away because of an argument we had," Rias blurted out, making Surziches and Grafia to freeze in horror upon hearing Rias saying that the brunette who they came to care for dearly has died. "How did this happen?" Surziches asked as he got over his initial shock. Thanks to him being a Mayu, he was already used to moments like this, where he got told that someone he knew died, but that didn't mean he was less sad about the death of his figurative little brother. Well, we were going back to our hotel room when Issei suddenly left us and went to talk with an unknown blonde girl, which made the girls angry and worried as they thought that he was flirting with her. When we got back to the hotel room, the girls confronted him about his feelings towards him, to which he answered in a way they were not happy with, making them lash out at him, which made him confused as he did not see what he did wrong. He tried to find out what exactly he did, but at the moment no one answered him because we were all upset at him, until he heard Butchu mutter something that we didn't manage to understand, until he repeated her words out loud. Kiba interjected, as he saw that his king was in no condition to explain what happened. What exactly did she say to Issei-kun? Surziches asked in curiosity as he averted his gaze from the blonde knight to his sister, who seemed to calm down a bit since she first appeared in his office. I said that I regretted reincarnating him, Rias said, which made Surziches and Grafia to have widened eyes as they looked at Rias in disbelief after hearing what she said. Why did you say that, Riatan? I thought that you loved him dearly, Surziches asked in astonishment, still not believing that his sister could say something like that to the man she loved. I was angry when I saw him flirt with that blonde girl. I started thinking that I didn't matter to Issei. I was flooded with anger and jealousy. Well, my mind reminded me of my biggest fears regarding me and Issei's relationship, Rias said, before she started to sob uncontrollably, once again deeming her unable to talk until she composes herself once again. Everyone was surprised to hear how Rias talked. They never heard her being so honest and straightforward, not even her brother and Grafia, who had wide eyes like the rest. Surziches-sama, may I say something? Kiba interjected before anyone could respond, making everyone look at the blonde knight in curiosity. Sure, Kiba, what is it? I think that Issei-kun might still be alive, Kiba said with a bit of hope evident in his voice, hoping that whatever he was going to say to Surziches would indeed turn out to be true. Surziches and Grafia gasped in surprise when they heard what Kiba said. They knew that if a reincarnated devil were to eject his evil pieces, then it will mean certain death, but when they heard what Kiba said they started to feel a little hope, since they knew that the blonde was smart, so he wouldn't come up with a ridiculous conclusion like that without having a good reason. Kiba, ejecting your evil pieces means a certain death, as you may already know, but I am intrigued as to why you think Issei-kun may still be alive, so please go ahead and explain, Surziches said with an emotionless expression, not allowing himself to show the bit of hope he was feeling. When we found the evil pieces we didn't find Issei-kun's body, which struck me as weird, since the ejection would mean that he would die mere seconds after it was done, Kiba explained, making Surziches puzzled as he started to think about what Kiba said before the latter continued to speak. I believe that someone else was with Issei-kun when his pieces were ejected. Maybe he survived and got abducted. Kiba asked with a grim face as he thought about the possibility of his best friend being taken and tortured. Surziches, with the addition of Grafia and everyone else, frowned upon hearing what the blonde knight said, as they too started to picture their beloved brunette being kidnapped and tortured. I must tell Kiba that you may be right, but we should keep our hopes to a minimum. I'll contact the other leaders later to tell them about it while asking them to help us search for Issei, Surziches said with a small smile on his face as he finally let the little hope he felt to creep out and be shown to everyone who mimicked his smile as their hope crept out as well. Several hours later. Surziches sat in his office with his head on his desk after finishing to talk with the other faction leaders about what happened with Issei and the possibility of him being alive. After Rias and the rest told him everything they knew or thought about the disappearance of the brunette, Grafia served them tea before they started to make small talk in an attempt to lift the grim atmosphere that lingered in the room. After an hour, Rias and the rest decided to leave as they saw the amount of paperwork that lay on Surziches' desk. After they left, Surziches was reminded by Grafia that he still had work to do as she brought him yet another bunch of paperwork to sort, making the redhead to sigh. When he was done a few hours later, he wanted nothing more than to end the day, but to his dismay, he remembered that he still had a long talk with the three faction leaders ahead of him regarding Issei, so he instead asked Grafia if she could give him coffee, as he called the three leaders. In Surzich's opinion, the talk went quite well considering the news he was about to deliver. He knew that telling the other factions about the brunette will make many emotions to surface within them, since he was aware that they had a liking towards the brunette. Especially Azazel, who seemed to have a lot in common with Issei. After a heated argument about their opinions on the matter, they decided that what Kiba said had a chance to be true, so they decided that they'll visit Surziches in a few days so they could start searching for the brunette. Of course, they wanted to start searching immediately, but considering the threat of the Cows Brigade that lingered above all the leaders' head, they knew that they had to do this right and not rush, so they decided that they will first take precautions before they leave, while Surziches sort the technical stuff, such as possible places and people who could be related to Issei's abduction. You should call it a day, dear, Grafia said as she noticed how drained her husband was, feeling pity as she saw how much he had to handle on his own today, as well as what to come now that Issei was missing. Surziches just nodded before he got up and went to his bedroom with slumped shoulders as Grafia followed him close behind. Few days later. Surziches, Michael, and Azazel sat in Surziches' office in the underworld as they discussed the Cows Brigade and what they should do about it, as well as the situation in the three factions, before they switched to the subject they initially came here for, Issei. One of their decisions regarding Issei was to form a search party that will be made of people from each faction who specialize in searching. Another decision regarding both the Chaos Brigade and Issei was to deploy people to guard places that the Chaos Brigade could target so they could intercept them and ask them if they have anything to do with Issei's disappearance, as well as prevent them from gaining more power. They decided that the search party would be made of Rias' peerage due to their relationship with the brunette. Kyoto was elected by Azazel to serve as the fallen angels representative in the search party. Irina as well was chosen by Michael to act as the angels representative in the search party. As for the people who were meant to defend the three factions' points of interest, as well as intercepting the Chaos Brigade members, they made several teams. Julio and Tobio were in charge of guarding Azazel's artificial sacred gear lab in the Gremory, in fear that the Chaos Brigade might steal one of the sacred gears. Sona and her peerage were in charge of guarding the underworld prison to prevent the Chaos Brigade from breaking out anyone who they deemed as useful for their cause. Serzich's peerage, with the exception of Grafia, was assigned to guard the underworld's capital, Lilith, while Sarerg and his peerage were assigned to guard the old capital, Lucifid. Berselda, Barakiel, and Grafia have chosen to each guard their own realms, while the leaders were staying with Serzich's as they were focusing on leading the search for Issei. After they had been done, they summoned each team and told him his role and where he would be deployed, which was answered with enthusiasm before they each went to their respective place. Afterward, they summoned Rias' peerage and told them that they would be in charge of searching for Issei, which made everyone very determined and happy before they all rushed out to find their missing brunette, not wanting to spend a single second. When they were done, they all went to Serzich's house where the latter showed the rooms they would be staying in while they searched for Issei. Afterward, they decided to grab something to eat and drink before they went to sleep in preparation for tomorrow, which will mark the start of the search for Issei. 9 days later. It has been 9 days since the three faction leaders started their search for Issei, and so far they did not come across any substantial evidence regarding Issei's status. During those 9 days, several attempts to attack the capital and the prison of the underworld were made by the several Chaos Brigade branches, such as the Magician and the Old Satan faction, who were looking to retrieve their captured members, as well as take revenge for their fallen, but to their dismay, they failed horribly, as they did not expect to come across any sort of countermeasures. Any hope they all had for finding Issei alive was starting to drain slowly with each passing day until today, when Serzich's, Michael, and Azazel were sitting at Serzich's office while they discussed about the recent attacks by the Chaos Brigade when the doors to the office were suddenly burst open, revealing two people they didn't expect to see. Julio and Tobio, who upon taking a closer look at could be seen panting slightly. Julio, Tobio. What are you doing here and why are you two panting? Serzich's asked in curiosity as he eyed the duo. We are sorry to intrude like that, but we have news regarding the Red Dragon Emperor, Julio said with a serious voice, making everyone who was present in the room gasp in surprise. What is it then? Serzich's asked in eagerness to know what news they learned about Issei. Well, the diminished hope appeared once again for all of them, but the hope they were all feeling was short-lived when they saw the grim-faced Tobio head, which made dread overthrow the hope. We came across members of the Hero faction, which is a branch of the Chaos Brigade, earlier, as they were trying to steal an artificial sacred gear from the Gregory's lab, Julio started to say, making the leaders frown upon hearing that yet another attack was made earlier. The team who took part in the attack had Vali, the White Dragon Emperor, and Kuroka, the infamous SS criminal Julio, continue while gazing at the three faction leaders who were already starting to get impatient as they waited for news regarding Issei. Julio sighed before finally delivering the news that he assumed would send the leaders into a state of shock. Sigh. Apparently the Red Dragon Emperor joined the Chaos Brigade since he as well took part in stealing the artificial sacred gear from the labs, Julio said, making the faction leaders to widen their eyes as they digested what he said, which he knew they did after hearing them gasp. Are you sure that it was Issei? Serzich's, who was the first to recover from the initial shock, asked in bewilderment, which was answered by Julio nodding. Yes, Julio deadpanned. I see, thank you Julio, Tobio. You may go take a rest if you like, Serzich's said, dismissing the duo, who nodded in acknowledgement before leaving the room. After the pair had left the room, Serzich's went back to his seat across from the two leaders while he refilled their glasses with more scotch. Sigh. This makes things more complicated than they already were. I never thought that Issei would be the one to join the Chaos Brigade. I always thought that he would be the one who'll help us defeat them, Serzich's said in sadness after taking a sip from his scotch. Indeed. I never expected him to join them as well, especially after knowing how much he loved Rias and the others, but apparently the damage they've done to him was bigger than we thought, Azazel said in sadness, as well as he thought about the one who he considered as a figurative son who he shared many interests with. I suppose I am going to call Grafia back so we can discuss what we'll do next, Serzich's said before he formed a magic circle near his ear to call his wife back. One thing was certain, and it was that Surziches, who despite his great love towards his sister, did not plan to tell her and her peerage about what they learned from Dulio and Tobio regarding Issei, because he knew how much it would affect them to know that the brunette that they loved dearly was alive and was a part of the biggest and egregious terrorist organization to exist in the supernatural world yet. By the time Issei and his team with the addition of Jean finally arrived in Kyoto, it was already late at night, the streets were vacant, and the only source of light was either the dim lamps that were spread across the street or the moonlight, which shone brightly upon Kyoto. They decided that they would search for Yusaka in the morning after getting a good night's sleep, so they could recover from the fatigue they had from the journey to Kyoto, which was long due to Lefei not being able to teleport them, much to their dismay. After several minutes of strolling around town in search of an inn to stay at, they finally found one. Upon entering the inn, they could see the old artifacts that graced the lobby, which emphasized Kyoto's importance in Japanese culture. "Hello there, are you looking to rent a room for the night?" An unknown voice asked them, breaking them from their daze and looking at the source of the voice, only to find an old man to whom they assumed was the owner of the inn standing behind the reception. "Yes. We were wondering if you happen to have 2 spare rooms for us," Vali asked after taking a quick glance at her teammates who just looked at her, waiting for her to reply to the old man. "Yes, I do, miss, here you go," the old man said after retrieving 2 keys and handing it to Vali, who took them with a smile at the old man who returned the gesture. "Thank you, sir," Vali replied before she and the rest went up to where their rooms were. Once they were in front of their rooms, they turned around to Vali with an unsure look which she quickly understood the source of. Issei, Arthur, and Biku, you take that room while Lefei, Kuroka, Jean, and I take this room, Vali told them, while pointing to the respective rooms each of them was supposed to take. No one answered as Issei just took the key from Vali, flashing her a small smile before he opened their room and went inside with the rest following suit while the girls did the same with theirs. Once they were inside their room, each of the boys took a shower by turn before each went to his own bed. "Phew, I am so glad to finally rest." Biku broke the silence that lingered in the room with a voice that conveyed how exhausted he was. "Me too, it was indeed a tiring task to arrive at Kyoto," Arthur replied while getting into his bed, his voice the same as Biku, one full of exhaustion that he tried to conceal due to his mannerism. Issei looked at his fellow teammates and laughed. He has known them for quite some time now, and he was starting to slowly open up to them, but there was still one thing that bothered him about them. "I was wondering, guys, why did you join the Cows Brigade?" Issei asked his partners in curiosity, which was answered by utter silence for a few long minutes before Arthur decided to break the silence that lingered in the room, seeing no point to hide his past from the man who he started to consider as a friend. "When I was a kid, I grew up in a house of nobility. My father cared deeply about the honor and the strength of our house, so when I was a child, he started to train me with swords in hope that I will become a great fighter for our house when I grow up," Arthur started to say with an emotionless voice. Because of his position, he was a strict and emotionless person who did not show love to either me or Lefei, who was born, and as a child, there was nothing I strived for more than my parents' love and support, which sadly never came, since I was forced to become something I didn't want to. I was forced to become a ruthless protector for our house who will not hesitate to kill anyone, as long as it benefits our house, Arthur said, shocking Issei and Biku, who was also hearing Arthur's past for the first time. "When I reached the age of 16, I was an entirely different man. I found the love that I strived to have with a girl I met as a part of my father's diplomatic affairs with the neighboring kingdom. In time we became deeply in love with each other, and I looked forward to spending the rest of my life with her like our fathers wanted, but one day I met Elaine, who was a maid in our house. At first, I was not very fond of her, but as I got to know her more on the occasions we met, my love for my betrothed girl started to fade, while my feelings for Elaine started to grow immensely with each time we talked," Arthur said before glancing to his 2 teammates, who now stared at him with wide eyes as they listened carefully for his past. "One day me and my betrothed walked in my family's gardens, and I decided that I'll tell her that I don't want to marry her because of my fading feelings towards her, as well as my growing feelings for Elaine, in hope that she'll understand. At first, it seemed that she understood my feelings and even supported and encouraged me to pursue Elaine, but luck can be deceiving, because after our talk in the gardens, she apparently went to my father and told him of my feelings for Elaine and my decision to not marry her, which made him enraged. The day afterward he summoned me so he could talk some sense into me. He tried to talk to me for hours, telling me that my marriage to the girl of the neighboring kingdom was essential for the survival of our kingdom, but I still refused, which infuriated him even more, and when he saw that he couldn't change my mind by words, he resorted to actions. He threatened to execute Elaine if I were to pursue my love to her and not marry my betrothed. I was shocked by his threat and realized at the same moment that as long as I stay there I will forever be forced to do as my father bid me, so I decided to leave the kingdom so Lane would not get killed, and so I did, but not before I managed to steal two of my kingdom's most precious swords. The Excalibur ruler and the Calibrum. After that I met with Vali and joined the Cows Brigade as a part of her team, Arthur said after finishing to tell his past, still with his stoic face, while Issei and Baiko's faces varied from intrigued, shocked, surprised and one that showed sheer respect for Arthur and his bravery. After Arthur had finished his story, the silence that encased the room before returned once again and stayed for a few minutes or eternity, as the occupants of the room thought before finally it was broken by Biku, who decided that after hearing Arthur tell them about his past, then he should tell them about his too. Well, I guess that my reason for joining the Cows Brigade came from the fact that I desired to be stronger. You see, my ancestor, Sun Wukong, took care of me ever since I can remember. I never knew my parents, but I was never saddened by that because Sun Wukong was like a father to me, so as time went by, I started to think less about my parents. As I grew older I began to train so I could inherit his position as the next Sun Wukong, so I asked him to help me, which he happily agreed to, but while we trained, I always noticed how dissatisfied he was with my skills. He never would have voiced that out loud, but I knew that he thought that I was weak, so I did my best so I could improve, but no matter how much I tried, I still saw the look on his face that showed me what he really thought. I knew that I would inherit his position when he dies, but I wanted to bring respect to it instead of dishonoring it, so one night I ran away while he slept, leaving him a note and hoping that he will understand my reasoning, which I doubt he did, so I don't look forward to meeting him while I am alive because he will probably kick my ass, Biku said in a grave voice before snickering towards the end, trying to lighten up the heavy mood that flooded the room. Once Biku was done with telling his story, he waited for his friend's reaction. While he did trust them completely, he was still scared that they would judge him for his decision to leave because of his strength, but it never came. In judgment's place came sympathy and understanding from his friends, making him release a breath he did not know he was holding, while a smile adorned his face, showing the sincere happiness he felt at the moment. After they had got over the two stories, they waited for Issei to tell his reason for joining the Cows Brigade. They knew Issei from before he joined, and they saw how determined he was to protect his peerage, who they could see he loved deeply, so they could only speculate on why the brunette joined their ranks all of a sudden. Understanding his friend's intrusiveness from the way they gazed at him, their eyes showing the immense desire to know while their mouths refused to let those thoughts be heard, Issei let out a sigh before he recounted the one memory that he wishes to forever lock in the depths of his mind. He was still not over that day, and it still pained him while he tried his very best to recover, but as hard as it was he was slowly getting there, and he couldn't say that right now wasn't a good help to his recovery, since it helped him strengthen the bond with his teammates. So with the encouragement he was getting from Drake in his subconscious along with the looks his friends gave him, he went ahead and told them his story. Once Issei was finished telling his story, he was fidgeting with his fingers nervously while he held his gaze downward towards the floor. Silence once again fell upon the room, which increased the brunette's anxiety, wishing that someone would already break the silence. After some time he managed to get enough courage to look up into his teammate's face, ready to deal with the looks of disapproval and mockery that he would receive. But after he looked at them he frowned because those looks never came. Instead, there were looks of sympathy, pity, and anger that made him tense up slightly, since he didn't know if he was the source of the angered look or his story, but his perplexity was answered shortly after that by Biku. "DSK, I always knew that those devils weren't jack shit," he said after gritting his teeth. Arthur chose not to add anything else, and instead just nodded in agreement to Baiko's statement before he looked at Issei and frowned after seeing the worried look he had. "Do not fret, Issei, we fully understand what you've been through, and we are sorry that you had to experience this, but it will not happen again while we are with you," he reassured, hoping that his words of reassurance would be enough to distinguish the fear in the brunette's heart. Issei looked at Arthur straight in the eyes, looking for any indication that would tell him that the blonde in front of him was lying, but he didn't find any, which made him grin in response. "Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that," Issei said before he and the rest decided that they should already go to sleep since it was late. The next day. It was early morning when everyone woke up, the sun was just rising, and the sound of birds chirping could be heard from outside. Once everyone woke up, they all went ahead and took a shower by turn before they quickly got ready for the day. "Good morning everyone," Vali greeted Issei, Lefei, Arthur and Jean, who were already outside, while Kuroka and Biku were still inside getting ready. They all returned Vali's greeting while grinning just as the doors to their rooms opened and revealed Biku and Kuroka were coming out from their respective rooms. Both were looking like they would collapse to the floor to continue their sleep any second. "Now that we are all here, let's go grab something to eat before we start searching for Yusaka," Vali said before taking off to the dining room with everyone in tow. After they had been all done eating, they thanked the inn owner and went outside to start their search for the yokai leader. Now, where do you think Yusaka could be? Vali asked her team, struggling to come up with where she could be at the moment. Maybe she went to grab a meal at a nearby restaurant. Biku asked right before his stomach growled, showing his need for more food and making everyone look at him with smirks on their faces. Especially Kuroka, who couldn't let an opportunity like this go to waste. Was bananas not enough for you, poor monkey? Kuroka teased Biku, who now had a vein pop on his forehead before his stomach once again growled, making him blush as he tried to conceal the noises to no avail and making everyone giggle in response. Issei, who watched the interaction of his teammates from the side, started thinking about where they could find Yusaka. He didn't know, but that name sounded really familiar to him, which confused him since he didn't remember ever coming across her, but after spending a long time trying to make sense of the feeling of familiarity he felt when he heard Yusaka's name, he finally remembered. Making him frown, which didn't go unnoticed by his team, who was now looking at him with concern. Is something the matter, Issei? Vali asked, to which Issei just shook his head before he proceeded to continue to think about what his next course of action should be. Would he tell them where Yusaka is so they could capture her, or would he lie and try to prevent her from being captured? He didn't know her personally, but after remembering her daughter, Kunu, and how scared she was when she thought her mother was kidnapped, he had doubts about if Kunu was any indication. Then he could say that Yusaka was just as kind, innocent and pure, making him wonder what Cao deemed to be so important that he asked them to kidnap her. He then thought about his team, who his bond with has significantly strengthened since they first met, especially after hearing Baiko's and Arthur's past. Issei thought about the girls who he came to develop great affection towards, and how would they react when they eventually find out that it was his fault that they failed the mission. Many scenarios ran through his mind, reminding him of his greatest fears, such as them shunning or kicking him off the team, or them just showing their immense disappointment in him. Each scenario terrified Issei to no end, as he thought about the possibility of one of those scenarios to come true, and the fact that he could not deal with another blow like this again. Why won't you just tell your team where she is but insist that you do not want to capture her? Drake interjected within Issei's subconscious, telling him his opinion in an attempt to calm the brunette down. That's actually a good idea, Drake. Thanks. Issei thanked his partner, who once again came to his aid. Is everything okay? Lefei asked Issei with worry evident in her voice as she and the rest saw the distraught the brunette was in. Huh? Yeah, thanks, Lefei. Issei replied with a sincere smile after he was snapped from his train and thoughts by the blonde magician, who nodded in response as a blush adorned her face. I know where Yusaka is, Issei muttered after taking a deep breath in order to calm down the feeling of uneasiness he was feeling, making everyone look at him in bewilderment. Why, you know, where is she? Vali, who was the first one to get over her bewilderment, asked Issei with her eyes widened. None of them had any clue as to where Yusaka could be, and they thought that Issei was no different, so they were very surprised to hear that he knew exactly where she was. Yes, but there's something I want to ask you before, Issei said as he started to sweat while the feeling of apprehension filled him. Go ahead, Issei. You can ask us anything you'd like, Vali said in a soft voice after she felt the distress Issei was in, once again reading him just like an open book, which comes to show the bond she had with the brunette, even if he was unaware of it, which she doubted. Issei looked at Vali and instantly calmed down after hearing what she said. Can we not capture her? Issei asked, shocking his team, who went completely silent in response to his request. What do you mean not capture her? Cao would kill us if we fail this mission, Vali asked in shock before shivering towards the end, after remembering what Cao might do to them if they failed this mission, especially after seeing how he stressed the importance of this mission. I know, but I can't allow her to be captured. She has done nothing wrong, and her daughter does not deserve to see how we take her mother right in front of her, Issei said with a newfound determination, which made Vali recoil in response, as she internally smiled upon seeing the familiar determination that made her fall for Issei. I see. Don't get me wrong, I really think this is a bad idea, but I will not do anything that will cause pain to any of our teammates. Just keep in mind the precautions that Vali said, making Issei fully understand the severity of his change of heart before they proceeded. Issei instantly nodded vigorously, his resolve was not wavering for a second, which made Vali flash him a small smile in return. Okay then, Vali said before she was interrupted by Jean, who did not look pleased by their decision. I will not tolerate your decision to betray the hero faction, and therefore I shall not take part in this mission anymore, Jean replied in a harsh tone, showing her anger for her teammates. I assumed you would say that, Jean, but we are not betraying the hero faction. We are ready to face any punishment that Cao would serve us, Vali rebutted, which seemed to catch the girl off guard before she quickly calmed down. Either way, what you are about to do is against our cause, and I shall not take part in actions that harm us, Jean said before walking away from the team, who did not seem to mind her taking off, as they did not try to change her mind, nor to bring her back. After Jin's departure, Issei's team asked him for Yusaka's whereabouts and told them that they should go and warn her of the possibility of Cao sending another team to capture her, which they deemed to be very likely to happen. While they were walking, Issei suddenly froze in horror as he felt an all too familiar aura that he wished he would never have to feel again moving towards Yusaka's shrine. Vali, who noticed Issei's abrupt stop and his face that showed sheer horror, frowned before she too felt a familiar aura, making her realize the source of the brunette's horror. Before Vali could say anything to Issei, they heard gasps not too far away from them, making her and her team look at the source. Rias said as she and her peerage stared at the brunette who they believed had died, none of them able to utter a single word as they were overtaken by shock. When Issei turned around, he tensed up as his blood started to run cold. There they were, his ex-peerage who he shared so much with. The girls who once mesmerized him and held such a prominent place in his heart, the guys who he considered to be good friends but no longer were those things. Now they were all people who took part in finally breaking the brunette's heart completely. Issei wanted to be mad at them, to lash out at them, but the feelings of sorrow and anguish overtook the rage in his heart that was boiling with each passing second. He averted his gaze to the ground, not being able to look at the faces of the people who caused him all this pain, while struggling to keep the unshed tears at bay, making him start shaking slightly. Vali and the rest of the team looked at their pained teammate in pity and sympathy, as they knew very well the amount of pain that the people who stood in front of them caused him. Why are you with them? They are a part of the Cow's brigade, Rias said in a hollow voice as she and the rest of her peerage kept looking at Issei and his team with wide eyes. Issei flinched upon hearing the question, but chose not to answer the Retide's question, keeping his focused stare on the source of all his pain, as his mind was overcome with the feelings of anguish. Why did she reincarnate me? She should have left me to die instead of causing me more pain, Issei asked himself in sadness as he thought about the fateful night when he was given a second chance by Rias after his death by the hands of his first girlfriend, no longer seeing it as a good thing. Instead, he saw it as nothing more than a curse meant to cause him nothing but pain. Partner, stop this. Drake roared in fury within his partner's subconscious after hearing the brunette's thoughts, making Issei winch from the power behind his partner's roar. Drake for his part was seething right now. At first, the dragon loved the Gremory peerage as he thought that they would be good for Issei, and he was confident that they would be able to mend his heart and vanquish his fears after Rainer. But he was gravely mistaken, as those who were supposed to be the glue for his heart ended up being nothing but a hammer that broke the remaining pieces into nothing but mere shards. The dragon, of course, was not really surprised as he already knew the vicious nature of the devils due to some of his past possessors being devils themselves or associating with them, but that didn't mean that Issei deserved it. Unlike the previous wielders of the boosted gear, Issei was considered to be the best welder to date by Drake, and he cared for the brunette a lot despite the torment he was being put through thanks to his wielder's perversion, which to his luck was no more. Hearing that his partner's despair would worsen even to a point of no return, Drake wished to prevent it, so he chose to do something that he wasn't sure he would be proud of. He released all his rage and killing intent into his partner, so the latter as an attempt to snap him out of his despair and make him fueled by the anger he was supposed to feel towards the Gremory peerage. Issei was still deep in his state of depression when all of a sudden he felt like his soul was consumed with intense rage and killing intent that were aimed at none other than Rias' peerage, who looked at him with their jaws dropped in response to the emotional spike that occurred within him. Issei gasped in shock at the sudden change before he noticed that his boosted gear appeared on his hand while he was still in his stupor, but before he could react to it, he was enveloped in a golden light. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker. Drake's voice boomed through the boosted gear, sounding angrier than usual, making the Gremory's peerage to cringe. Issei for his part was more than shocked when he found himself clad in his scale mail. He had no idea where those intense rage and killing intent were coming from, but after spending a minute to think about it, Issei realized that it was Drake who flooded him with his own feelings, making the boosted gear to respond to his feelings and force him into the balance breaker. When he gazed at his ex-peerage again, he could feel that something was definitely different from how things were just mere minutes ago. Sorrow and anguish were replaced by boiling rage and intent to kill aimed at the peerage, who now had looks of utter horror from the side of Issei and scale mail, looking ready to kill them. Seeing Issei like this made them shiver, as this was not the brunette who they grew to love. No, this was the result of the now broken brunette who they along with Rainer helped to create. Issei's team stared at him in awe after they sensed the spike of rage and killing intent before he was suddenly clad in his scale mail. All of them have the same thoughts in their minds. We need to back off and let him do his own. Rias, who was the first to recover from the shock they were all feeling, knew that her peerage was in danger, so in response to the will to protect her peerage, along with the swirling emotions that she felt after seeing Issei, her power of destruction flared up and enveloped Rias, who was now releasing an impressive aura on her own. Making the rest of the peerage recover from their shock too and prepare for the imminent battle, despite how much they didn't want to fight Issei. Ice, please. "We don't want to fight you, so please stand down," Rias said with hope clearly evident in her voice, hoping that the brunette still had feelings for them other than hate and anger. Much to Rias and her peerage dismay, Issei did not respond and instead stood still for a few seconds before he suddenly vanished, making them panic and look frantically around them. Zenobia, who was stationed near Arena at the back, suddenly saw Issei appear behind the letter's back, ready to deliver a lethal kick to her back. Zenobia, who knew that one of her best friends was about to be severely hurt, did the only thing she could and rushed to block Issei's attack with her durandal. The rest of the peerage gasped when they heard the sound of metal clinking with each other and quickly turned around to find the source, only to find Zenobia struggling to block a kick from Issei with her durandal. "Zenobia!" They all shouted in worry and were about to rush to the brunette side to help her with blocking Issei's attack when Kaneko, who was the closest, delivered a fist to the defenseless Issei, sending him flying across the street and into a nearby building. "Zenobia? Irina? Are you okay?" Rias asked in worry as she reached them, to which she was answered by a set of two reassuring smiles and nods from the girls, making her exhale a breath in relief. They all turned their gazes when they heard the sound of rubble being moved before Issei came out of it looking unscathed. Quickly they all charged their attacks and aimed them at Issei, when all of a sudden he disappeared once again, making their panic from before return as they began looking for him once more. They couldn't find him no matter how much they looked, and they were about to stop looking and just wait for any sign of him when they heard something that sounded like energy being charged. Before they could even react to the sound, they heard Issei yell something that made them shake. "Dragon shot," he yelled as he directed the attack onto Kaneko, who took it heads on as she was unable to deflect it, rendering the rook unconscious and severely wounded. "Kaneko?" They all yelled in terror before Asia, who rushed to her aid, reassured them that she was alive but severely wounded, making the blonde bishop start healing her immediately. "Why did you do it, Issei-kun? Kaneko was your friend?" Kiba asked in anger, but to his dismay, the brunette did not respond, making the blonde knight shake with fury before he rushed at the one who he once considered to be his best friend. While Kiba and Issei were engaged in an intense melee battle, Rias and the rest took this chance to regain their thoughts and come up with a strategy so they won't end up being dead, believing that Kiba will be capable of fending off Issei in the meantime. While Rias and Akeno were supposedly stronger than Issei, they knew that when a sacred gear host is fueled by intense emotions, such as anger, the sacred gear would correspond to its possessor feelings, meaning that any advantage Rias and Akeno had over Issei in terms of power was no longer relevant, as they didn't know the extent of the strength Issei could receive from his longiness. After they had come up with a strategy, they turned around and gasped at the sight they beheld. Kiba, who was on one knee, was panting while holding his hand that, like most of his body, bled, while Issei looked unaffected except for a few scratches on his scale mail, meaning that Kiba managed to slightly damage the armor. Much to their horror, Issei approached Kiba and kicked him in his abdomen, sending him flying backward into Rias and the others' direction. The Keno, who was the closest to Kiba, checked him and informed them all that he was still breathing, but if he wouldn't get any medical treatment soon he wouldn't make it, making the remaining members of the peerage shake in fury from almost losing another precious friend. Any feeling of doubt about fighting Issei disappeared from all of them, and they quickly charged their power again and started fighting the brunette, who looked unfazed from the display of power. Zenobia rushed to Issei with a loud battle cry in an attempt to land a decisive blow on his head with her durandal, but to her dismay, Issei blocked it with his hands at the last seconds, although she smirked when she saw that his hands were damaged in the process. Her happiness did not live long when suddenly she felt like her stomach was torn open and was forced to exhale all her air, making her snap her gaze down, only to see Issei's knee striking her stomach with an intense force that sent her flying to a nearby tree. Much to Issei's surprise, Zenobia stood back up, although barely, and rushed in his direction with a fierce battle cry once again, but to her dismay, Issei managed to grab her face and slam her into the ground, generating a crater in the process. The remaining members of the Gremory group, who consisted of Rias, Akeno, Irina and Asia, paled from the losses of their friends. They started to shake once again, only this time it was from fear of not being able to escape this fight alive. With each loss, they received Ria's power of destruction increased in strength, although she wasn't sure her powers would even be useful against Issei, but at this point, she had no choice but to believe that it did. "Asia, how are everyone?" Rias asked her bishop, who looked like she was about to collapse from the strain of healing the downed members of the peerage. "They are fine for now, Rias Onasama," Asia said in exhaustion. "I see. Thank you, Asia," Rias replied with a grateful smile aimed at her bishop and one of closest friends who, without her the downed members of the peerage would have been no more. Rias glared at Issei half-heartedly when she averted her gaze from Asia to him. "How could you use it? Those were your friends who you almost killed. I thought you cared for us," Rias said with tears now cascading down her cheeks. Even after what he did, Rias couldn't find it in herself to hate Issei, because deep inside she hoped that the brunette would forgive them, despite how little that hope was. Right now, despite her unwillingness to fight Issei, she has to. She had to make sure her peerage and dear friends would live to see another day, and she wasn't going to give up even when the person who she was fighting held a special place in her heart. Rias widened her eyes when she saw Issei prepare yet another powerful attack aimed at her direction that, unlike the last attack, was much more powerful. Seeing no other way, she charged her power of destruction and shot a powerful beam at Issei. At the same time he released his own attack. Dragon shot. He shouted with so much anguish and fury that made Rias slightly quiver while sadness filled her, knowing that she and the rest were the cause of those feelings. When both attacks collided with each other, a bright light enveloped the entire area. Vali's team and the remaining members of the Gremory group were blinded. Fear was filling them for their friend's fate as each attack battled for superiority. When the light had faded, Issei and Rias were both panting as they were both starting to be overtaken by magic exhaustion, none uttering a single word to each other as they slowly recovered from their fatigue. Much to Ria's luck, the battle for superiority ended up in a tie at the last second, and she managed to escape physically unscathed, but also substantially exhausted from the effort to fend off the attack that would have surely killed her. Rias. Akeno shouted in worry as she rushed to help her best friend and king before she collapsed from exhaustion. Much to their dismay, Issei managed to recover from his magical deprivation thanks to his boosted gear that kept boosting his powers, being ready to continue fighting in no time. Much to their horror, the Keno, who saw Issei preparing to fight again, quickly flew away while supporting Rias and landed near Asia, hoping that the bishop could help Rias to recover quickly. After Akeno had asked Asia to help Rias with her exhaustion, she flew back to the remaining debris of the place where Issei and Rias' attacks fought for superiority. No longer seeing a point in trying to reach the brunette by talking, Akeno instead reluctantly decided to attack Issei with as much power as she could muster. Clad in her priestess uniform, Akeno started preparing to attack Issei. She knew that attacking with all her powers focused on a single attack would be fruitless after what happened to Rias, so instead, she decided that she'll try and exhaust Issei once again so she could strike him when he isn't able to defend himself, so he'll go unconscious, which would give them enough time to retreat. Issei, still in his scale mail that was cracked in several places, has already started showing signs of physical fatigue, but despite his fatigue, he refused to give up, and so he quickly charged up and began to battle Akeno. Issei and Akeno were clashing in the sky with speed that even a devil couldn't catch sight on, both fueled by the intense emotions they were feeling. Akeno, who kept attacking Issei with her holy lightning, managed to strike the letter a few times, making her hopeful. Issei for his part managed to land only a single dragon shot on Akeno. Although the attack was weak, it still did quite some damage. They kept fighting for a long time, both sending powerful attacks towards each other, both hoping that the other would be the first to give up. While Akeno regained her breath after releasing yet another powerful holy lightning, Issei looked down and saw that some of the peerage members who he struck down have started to slightly recover after Asia healed them, making Issei realize that it won't matter if he will defeat Akeno as long as Asia's still standing and healing them all. Deciding to take advantage of the small break he received to turn the battle in his favor, Issei quickly dived down before Akeno finished regaining her breath, making the latter gasp in horror as she saw the direction he was heading. Asia. She yelled from the bottom of her lungs in an attempt to warn the blonde, but to no avail, as she was too far from her, so instead she quickly dove down after Issei as fast as she could with one purpose in mind: stopping Issei before it's too late. Asia, who was focused on healing her fallen friends, gasped in surprise when she heard something stopping in front of her. Looking up to see what it was, she widened her eyes when she saw it was Issei who was standing in front of her. "Issei-san," Asia shyly said as she began crying, but much to the girl's horror Issei ignored her and instead retracted his hand as he prepared to deliver a lethal fist aimed at her. "Issei-san, please don't do it," Asia pleaded in hope as she was now sobbing uncontrollably, but to her dismay, Issei showed no signs of stopping, so instead she prepared for the upcoming killing blow, while believing that if it was God's will, then she will accept it. "Asia. Get away fast," she heard Akeno say from afar, but she kept still. Irina, along with Asia and Akeno, was the last standing member of the Gremory group who stood away from Asia, snapped her gaze to the blonde's direction, and gasped in shock as dread filled her, not being able to mutter a word as she was overtaken by the shock of the sight she beheld. Asia flashed Issei one last smile before she closed her eyes and waited for his attack that would end her life. "I'm sorry for everything, Issei-san. Goodbye and thank you for being my first friend," she apologized in a whisper before she felt his fist coming closer and closer to her face. "Asia, no." Akeno and Irina shouted in anguish as they witnessed their beloved friend's death, both too late in helping Asia. Tears started to cascade down their faces as they felt a piece of their heartbreak, but the thing that happened then made them gasp in awe and disbelief. There stood Issei with his fist just mere inches from Asia's face. "If I can't do it," Issei spoke in agony for the first time since the battle began. "Issei-san. Thank you," Asia tenderly thanked as she slowly opened her eyes. But before Issei could do or say anything, he was quickly struck by lightning, sending him flying into a nearby building. The Keno who launched this attack quickly grabbed Irina's hand and dragged her with her near the others before she prepared a magic circle that would teleport them away. When Issei woke up, he was surprised to see that he no longer was on the street where he and his team had met Rias and her peerage. Instead, he found himself lying down someplace that didn't look familiar to him, making the boy spring to his feet in panic. As Issei scanned his surroundings, he realized that judging from the paintings on walls and the artifacts around the room that he currently was at some sort of a shrine. He wondered why he was at a shrine when all of a sudden everything that happened in the fight with Rias and his ex-peerage, as well as the events that happened prior to that, flooded his mind, making him groan in pain following a sudden headache that attacked him in response. He growled in exasperation as his mind replied the pleas of Rias and the rest for him to stop his attack on them, hoping that whatever they shared in the past would affect the brunette, to which they were gravely mistaken, as his memories of them were no longer the happy ones he had in the past. Now his memories were those full of sorrow and anguish from their betrayal. Issei's heart was starting to hurt from the thoughts about it, and so Issei decided to push those thoughts to the back of his mind for now, so he could focus on figuring out where he was exactly. Spotting a barely visible door, Issei approached it and opened it as quietly as he could, so he wouldn't alarm anyone of his presence, especially when he still didn't know if whoever occupied the shrine were friendly or not. As he tiptoed around the quiet shrine, he was starting to grow frustrated by the lack of anything that could help him to figure out where he was, until he suddenly began to hear faint whispers across the long corridor, making him hitch his breathing as he grew more nervous with each passing second. Ready for battle, Issei walked slowly to the source of the whispers, which grew louder with each step, arriving at a door that was identical to the one he used to exit his room. Deciding to try and listen to what the people on the other side of the doors are saying, Issei leaned his ear on the door in an attempt to improve his hearing. "I hope he's going to wake up soon." He suffered a pretty sharp attack. A familiar voice was heard from the other side, making Issei cock an eyebrow in confusion. Much to the boy's chagrin, he had no time to ponder further about it when the door he leaned on abruptly opened, which resulted in Issei falling to the floor with his face first. Issei Vali's voice rang in surprise and delight upon seeing her companion and beloved one up and well as she ran to help him get up before enveloping him in a tight embrace. "Issei." LeFay's tender voice rang out as well in happiness before she followed Vali's movements and rushed to help the brunette up before she as well enveloped him in a tight embrace, while Arthur and Biku, who were not interested in hugging Issei, chose to smirk instead. After Issei had managed to release himself from the bone-crushing embrace he was enveloped in by Vali and LeFay, he flashed them a small smile before he surveyed his surroundings once again. He saw the same style of paintings on the walls, as well as more artifacts that further proved his thought of this place being a shrine. His eyes then darted to Arthur and Biku, who he saw were smirking at him, which he returned before once again averted his gaze, only to widen his eyes when it landed on a rather familiar little girl who was accompanied by another girl who was basically the adult version of this girl, making him to gasp in astonishment from the beauty of the girl. The girl was a voluptuous young woman with blonde hair and matching eyes, with an attire of a shrine maiden that hugged her figure perfectly. "It's to meet you, Sekiryute-sama. My name is Yusaka, and I assume that you're already familiar with my daughter, Kunu." The blonde beauty that was now known as Yusaka said with a gentle smile on her face and a soft voice. Issei was still entranced by the beauty of the girl in front of him, which was evident to everyone due to him continuing to stare at Yusaka lecherously. Yusaka, who blushed in response, tried to hide it by covering her cheeks with her hands before she tried addressing Issei, who she thought was quite handsome once again. "Sekiryute-sama?" Yusaka asked as she tried to play it off like she didn't catch him staring so he wouldn't panic, although this was proving to be hard as her blush intensified with each passing second that Issei stared at her. The rest of the girls caught Issei staring and pouted in response, while Vali and surprisingly LeFay as well glared daggers at Issei for daring to look at another woman like that. After several long minutes, Issei finally snapped out of his daze and shook his head in confusion, as well as wiping a trickle of blood that appeared from his nose before he addressed the blonde beauty in front of him. Much to his luck, Issei was still able to hear what the blonde beauty in front of him said. So much to his luck, he already knew her name, relieving him that he avoided a rather awkward interaction. "It is to meet you as well as Yusaka. My name's Issei. Kunu told me a lot about you," the brunette finally replied, flashing the girl a grin which was returned by the latter. "Thank you, Issei-sama." Please just call me Issei, Issei insisted, to which he was answered with a nod from Yasaka before he was directed by the latter to sit by the table. When Issei sat down, Yasaka quickly went ahead and poured tea into his glass before she went ahead and sat near her daughter. You must be wondering why we are here, Yasaka, Issei said after taking a sip from his tea. Indeed, Issei, I was quite surprised when young Vali and the rest of your team appeared at my doorstep with you unconscious in their hands, Yasaka replied in a tone that made sure to convey to Issei and his team that she was not made from their abrupt appearance at her doorstep, which they greatly appreciated, as was evident in the grateful smiles they flashed her. Ah, sorry about that, Issei sheepishly replied while rubbing the back of his head. Well, if you don't mind me asking, Issei, then why is it that you were unconscious when your team arrived? Yasaka inquired in curiosity, staring intently at Issei as she patiently waited for him to answer. Issei visibly tensed up after hearing the Yaokai's leader's question as sweat started to pour off his body as well, making Yasaka to frown as she saw his response to her question. It is alright if you don't want to talk about it, Issei, she reassured the brunette in a tender voice, exclaiming that he wasn't forced to divulge this information with her if it was too much for him. Issei visibly relaxed before he shook his head and offered Yasaka a grateful smile for her worry. It's okay, Yasaka, I'll tell you what happened. And so, Issei began telling Yasaka and her daughter everything that transpired ever since his last visit to their shrine. What Rias and the others did and how it pushed him into running away, how he met Vali and Cao, who offered him a chance to start anew in the hero faction, and how he met his team, which he grew to care for over time. The brunette then grimaced, greatly changing the atmosphere of the talk to a more grim one when he started to tell Yasaka and Kunu about the mission they got from Cao and his unknown intentions in the case that the mission was a success. Yasaka and Kunu freaked out as Issei expected, but upon realizing that the team in front of them had not attempted to capture them yet, nor have they showed any intention to the Yaokai mother and daughter, has both visibly relaxed as a sigh of relief escaped their mouths, but their relief did not live for long as Issei told them about the potential in Cao sending another team. Most likely a stronger and less compassionate one, to capture her in the very near future. Yasaka and Kunu were never more grateful when they heard the reasoning behind Issei's decision of refusing to complete the mission. Kunu was overjoyed as it meant that her mother was out of harm's way, while Yasaka had mixed feelings about it. She felt happiness and comfort about staying at her daughter's side, fear, worry, and uncertainty about what the future may hold them, but when her thoughts drifted to the brunette who refused to capture them, despite knowing the risks for this decision, started to feel many emotions swirling inside of her. She respected Issei for the noble choice he has made and the unselfishness he showed in choosing the favor of peoples who were pretty much pure strangers to him. She felt happiness that people like him still existed, but all the more the feeling that was noticeably much larger than the others was the undying and growing affection that she started to feel for the brunette. The affection that she knew would never waver as long as she lives, for she knew that each breath she took, each moment she spent with her daughter was made possible because of Issei's decision. So what should I and my daughter do? It's not like you and your team would always be there for us when the need arises, Yasaka asked in desperation as she saw no solution for the problem she and her daughter faced right now. When Yasaka asked, Issei frowned, the tone she used made his heart ache as he no longer heard Yasaka, the Yaokai leader. No, this tone showed that right now she was nothing more than a mother whose main concern is her and her daughter's well-being. Issei realized something at that moment. He realized that he cared for Yasaka and Kunu much more than he thought, and seeing their growing distress angered him greatly, especially when he was positive that there's something he could do. And so, at this very same moment of enlightenment, Issei vowed to himself that he would not let Yasaka and Kunu be left alone with no one to defend them. Come with us, Issei said, his eyes burning with sheer determination, generating gasps of consternation and surprise from both Yasaka and his team. What do you mean, come with you? Yasaka gulped in nervousness before she hesitantly asked while eyeing Issei warily in an attempt to figure out if the brunette had a sudden change of heart. I am not going to leave you and Kunu alone, not when the two of you are in danger, so come with me and my team. I'll talk to Cao and let him know that if he wants to live, then he wouldn't dare lay a finger on you, Issei said fluently without stuttering for a second. Making Yasaka to relax as she smiled her biggest smile ever before, she started to fear and worry for the brunette whose her affection to has immensely grown with each passing second, knowing that his resolve would have great consequences for him and his team. Why? Yasaka asked in a small voice as she cast her gaze to the floor in shame. Tears were starting to cascade down her face and onto the wooden floor. Why what? Why are you willing to risk your life for someone worthless as me? Yasaka asked, humble and curious as she wept her tears. When she lifted her head shortly after, she didn't expect to be gripped tightly by her shoulders by Issei, who now had a scowl on his face as he glared at her in unadulterated anger. Never say that again. Your life is not worthless, nor will it ever be. You have many peoples who care and love you like Kunu, the Yaokais, and now my team and I, so don't think for even a second that your life is worthless," Issei said while resuming his angry glare at Yusaka, who now looked at him with wide eyes and mouth agape. Sheer admiration. That was the feeling Yusaka was currently feeling after hearing what Issei said to her. With her eyes wide and her mouth agape, she gawked at the brunette who kept surprising her and giving her many reasons to love him, along with many other things with each word that came out of his mouth. Yes, Yusaka was now more than sure that what she felt about Issei was unadulterated love. Admiration, respect, happiness, and a sense of security were also some of the feelings she felt about Issei among many other emotions. For her, Issei was a person with a heart that couldn't be rivaled in his purity, his determination that would never waver even in the toughest situations, his happiness is like a ray of sunlight among the darkness of this world. Never in her entire life has she come across someone who was even slightly similar to Issei, and she was more than grateful for receiving the chance to meet the boy who captured her in every possible way, even though she met him just a few hours ago. Yusaka knew that as long as she had Issei by her side, she and her daughter would be safe, no matter who's standing in front of them. One thing for sure, Yusaka couldn't wait to get to know Issei much better and to hopefully be a constant in his life along with her daughter. Hoping that they both will spend the rest of their lives with their guardian, who ironically was a dragon and an ex-devil and not an angel. And Yusaka knew, she knew that leaving with her daughter to go with Issei is the best choice not only for the both of them, but for the Yaokais she led as well, because those who will be put in grave danger when the enemy comes knocking on the door would be the Yaokais, and as a dedicated leader, she couldn't allow her own peoples to get in danger because of her. So when Yusaka snapped back to reality by being shaken slightly by Issei, she found herself doing something that she never thought she would. At least not yet. She fed him. Issei looked at the awestruck Yusaka for several minutes before he decided to shake her to make sure she was okay. He didn't know why, but Yusaka was different. He couldn't explain it other than feeling a great deal of affection for the girl who he met several hours ago, along with the sheer determination to defend her and her daughter no matter what. He never thought that everything that happened to him would find it in his breaking heart to care about a person like this. Sure, there was his team, but they gained his trust and caring over time, unlike Yusaka, which for some reason quickly secured herself and her daughter a large spot in the broken mess he called a heart. But he knew better, he knew that he needed time to trust Yusaka, despite the affection he felt for her fully. At first, Rias was similar to Yusaka. The Redeed held a big piece of his slightly broken heart at that time, but he knew what happened next, and so, he couldn't afford himself the luxury of trusting Yusaka right off the bat, with or without the great affection he felt for the Yaokai fox. He wondered how Yusaka felt about him. She must think I'm the weirdest person she met, Issei thought to himself in amusement, not realizing how far his thoughts were from reality. But reality came crushing on the boy when Yusaka suddenly assaulted him with so much vigor and passion that actually surprised him. His eyes widened from the shock he had felt from Yusaka's sudden assault on his, before he felt the feelings that she tried to convey to him through this flooding him. He felt it all. The great affection she as well felt about him, the happiness of him saving her and her daughter, and her admiration. But he would be foolish if he thought that was it, because the one who had him felt much more than what he could transmit. Issei found himself doing the one thing he never imagined he would. He relented and returned with equal passion and emotions, which he hoped Yusaka would perceive correctly due to his emotional condition. And Yusaka did, which made her lean on Issei more, but much to her dismay, they were both interrupted shortly after by an enraged Vali and Lafay, who got over their initial shock of seeing Issei and Yusaka, both girls releasing a fair amount of killer intent aimed at the fox Yaokai, who shivered slightly in response. When she and Issei parted, words were not needed for them to show each other how they felt. Meeting each other's eyes was the only thing they required for the both of them to know that they'll have to talk alone afterward when the chance appears. Issei looked at Vali and Lafay and gulped nervously from the glares they gave both him and Yusaka, which he tried his hardest to ignore, but to no avail, as he kept feeling like their looks pierced him. "Why, you should all stay the night here and rest before we'll all leave tomorrow," Yusaka nervously said as she did her very best not to look at the two girls' eyes, before she quickly stood up and told everyone to go to their rooms. As everyone left, Issei, who was the last one to leave, was about to exit the door into the big hall when he felt a hand on his shoulder, making him stop and look at Yusaka, whose hand belonged to her. "Thank you," Yusaka said in sincerity and gratefulness before she and Issei left the room and into the hall that would help lead them each to their respective rooms, where they would spend a nightless sleep, each figuring out their emotions for one another. Issei was in his room, laying down on his bed where he woke up a few minutes ago. He looked at the ceiling as he tried to move his hand to support his head, only to groan in pain from even the slight movement. "You did good, partner, you should return to sleep," Drake recommended his partner after feeling the latter increasing exhaustion and pain, feeling proud at the brunette for what he did in the past few days. "Thanks, Drake, but still, I wish I could have been stronger." If it weren't for that then I would have died for sure. Issei addressed his partner back in slight happiness from the dragon's praises for what he achieved before his thoughts changed to what had happened earlier, making him frown as he slumped his shoulders in shame and defeat. I know, partner, and in time you will, but for now just be careful. You should get some more sleep now, partner, so you could heal quicker. Okay, Drake. Thanks again. Issei had yawned before he closed his eyes while he hoped that if he returned back to sleep, the pain would subside. Loud snoring could be heard shortly after by anyone who passed by his room. While the boy slept heavily, his mind, instead of allowing him to have the nice dream he longed for, recalled the events that transpired in the recent few days. Last night, Issei and his team, with the addition of Yusaka, had woken up at dawn and were currently helping Yusaka and Kunu to pack their stuff that they would bring with them to their new home. Fear, anxiety, happiness, safety. These were the feelings that the blonde shrine maiden and her daughter felt as they packed their belongings. While they thought about one thing, a new life, and it scared Yusaka a lot. Each item she placed in her luggage was placed there hesitantly and with hands that shook violently until the item had been put in the luggage, then she would breathe a sigh of relief and repeat the process. She was scared that agreeing to Issei's offer was a bad idea. Scared that her daughter would be endangered because of her and the choice she made. She didn't know Cao Cao, but from what Issei's team told her she knew that he was not someone to mess with, and that was because of his Longinus, the Saint Longinus spear. But from time to time she would glance at Issei, and all of a sudden she felt a lot lighter, like a big weight has been lifted from her shoulders, as well as a warm feeling that flooded her from inside, that soothes her from her fears. Fear and anxiety were replaced with happiness and safety when she saw Issei, the man who had such a big effect on her life after such a short time she knew him, and Vali, who she considered as a newfound friend who she was sure would become one of her best friends. She was happy to be with Issei and the rest, and she felt safe when she thought about the legendary dragon of domination and the dragon of supremacy who she knew would protect her and her daughter when danger arises, and for that she was grateful. Alright, we're finally finished. Issei ecstatically yelled as he put his clenched fist near his head triumphantly. It seems like we are, Yusaka replied with a small smile aimed at the boy whose antics she found amusing, happy from finishing with her and Kunu's packing. Let's go then. Issei said in excitement as everyone just nodded and slowly vacated the room, everyone except Yusaka, who stayed behind with her head down and her gaze aimed at her now closed luggage. Are you okay? Issei softly asked as he placed his hand on her shoulder in an attempt to comfort the girl from whatever had troubled her mind. Why yeah. She stuttered hesitantly, hoping that Issei would drop the issue. But, to her slight dismay, the boy did not drop it at that. I know you're lying, Yusaka, so tell me, what's wrong? Issei said in a commanding voice that showed the blonde that no was not something he wanted to hear from her. Was it the right choice? Yusaka vaguely asked Issei, who cocked an eyebrow in perplexion. What is? Was my choice to come with you the right thing to do? What if Kunu would be in danger? What would happen if Cao Cao won't allow us to stay with you? She nervously asked as her anxiety returned, but much more intense than earlier. Issei wouldn't take it. He quickly spun Yusaka so she would face him and placed both his hands on her shoulders as he looked deep into her mesmerizing golden yellow eyes. Listen to me, I said I would protect you and Kunu, and I will, even if it means me dying, because I care for the both of you, and I will protect you like I have protected every other person I care for. His words took Yusaka back, the sheer determination he possessed and the confidence that he'll be able to protect them. She now remembered what it was that made Issei capture her. When she packed, her thoughts were so clouded with her dread and anxiousness that she forgot, but now she fully remembers why. Thank you, Issei, she said with a sincere smile before she captured him in an intense but short dot. Once they parted, a thread of saliva could be seen connecting their mouths. I care a lot for you, Yusaka, for you and Kunu, and as the dragon of domination, I would destroy those who try to lay their hands on you too. He deadpanned before his expression softened and revealed a small, reassuring smile that caused Yusaka to tightly embrace Issei, who returned the gesture. Shortly after they parted from their embrace and quickly went outside where the rest waited for them. Sorry for keeping you waiting, Issei sheepishly said as he rubbed the back of his head after noticing the irritation Vali, Kuroka, and Biku held. Let's just hurry, Vali said before Lefei formed a magic circle and teleported them back to the Hero Faction's HQ. Shortly after they found themselves in the main and currently empty hall of the Hero Faction's HQ. It seems like the hall is empty. Wait here, and I'll go get Cao Cao, Vali commanded everyone before she started her walk to Cao Cao's chambers, only to stop a step afterward when the door to the hall suddenly opened and from it emerged an exasperated Cao Cao, who glared at Vali's team. I see you came back, although not with the results I hoped you'll achieve. Jean told me what happened, but it seems like you brought the fox with you, so I let this one slide, Cao Cao said in an emotionless tone as he gazed at Issei's team, mostly on Yusaka, who nervously played with her fingers as she avoided his piercing and intimidating gaze. As Cao Cao was about to reach Yusaka and take her from Issei and his team, he was surprised when Issei stepped in between him and the blonde, but his surprise faded and anger replaced it when he figured the meaning of Issei's action a few seconds afterward, glaring at the brunette in response. "What is the meaning of this, Issei?" he asked with an elevated voice that meant to intimidate Issei and make him step down along with his hard glare that was aimed at the brunette. "I am not going to let you take her, Cao Cao. I brought them so they could live under my and my team's watch instead of staying at Kyoto and be threatened by the next team you'll send to kidnap her," Issei said, elevating his voice as well while glaring daggers at the raven-haired guy. "And what makes you think you'll be able to stop me?" he asked in mockery while rolling his eyes. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker Drake's voice roared through the halls of the hero faction, shocking everyone who were present, with the exception of Cao Cao, who smirked. "Balance Breaker, eh? Are you sure you want to go down that way, Issei?" Cao Cao asked in an emotionless tone as his hand drifted to his spear, making everyone aware of his intentions. "I'm sure." The next thing everyone witnessed was Cao Cao's spear making its way to Issei's abdomen, only to eventually pierce nothing but air. "Running already?" Cao Cao taunted while snickering only to stop when a fist interlocked with his face, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. The next thing everyone saw was the dust that the Cao Cao's collision with the wall generated as well as pieces of debris that flew from the wall. "I gotta admit that was quite a punch, but you'll have to do much more than that to take me down," Cao Cao said as he climbed out of the wall, as he rubbed the place Issei's punch made contact with. "I didn't expect it," Issei said while smirking under his helmet before he dashed at Cao Cao again with one goal in his mind, to protect Yusaka and Kunu from being taken. 1 hour later. The fight between Issei and Cao Cao has been going on for 1 hour already, and so far both sides don't show any sign of stopping anytime soon. Currently, they were engaged in another face-off with each other, Issei using his fists while Cao Cao dodged them and would occasionally try to impale Issei with his spear, but to no avail. "Give up already, Cao Cao," Issei yelled at Cao Cao, who now was nothing more than his enemy. Issei hated to think of Cao Cao as an enemy, but he knew that in order to protect his team from the consequences of their actions and Yusaka and Kunu from their forlorn fate, he had to do this, he had to fight Cao Cao, even when he knew that the man could outmatch him, something Cao Cao has yet to do. And Issei was confused from that because he was aware that it was possible, so why haven't he done it yet? He knew that Cao Cao was very serious when it came to the goals of the hero faction, so why didn't he take him down? He was defending the person Cao Cao deemed to be vital for their organization's plans. He found this all very odd, but that didn't mean that he'd give up the fight with so much at stake. But Cao Cao was also someone he held in high regard. He was the one who, along with Vali, gave him a third chance in life. A new life, a life that hopefully would not bring him the same pain his last two brought him. If it wasn't for the two of them, Issei was sure that he would either become a stray devil, alone to fend off his enemies, or would have killed himself from the grief he felt from Ria's words. "I was going to say the same thing to you, Issei," he heard Cao Cao reply as he continued to dodge his punches. "I am not going to give up, Cao Cao. Not when it concerns people I care deeply for," the brunette replied with sheer determination that made Cao Cao quite impressed, although he wouldn't show it. "Very well, then you should suffer the fate that comes to every person who opposed my ideals. Bring it on." Issei replied in vigor as adrenaline kept pumping into him, more so now that he knew Cao Cao was going to get serious. The next thing Vali and the rest of the observers saw made them gasp in horror. They saw Cao Cao's spear making its way towards Issei's abdomen with no obstacle in its way. "Issei, no." The girls cried in horror while the guys just dropped their heads in sadness from the consequences the attack would bring. Vali couldn't believe it. Here was the one she loved so much fighting her leader who was mere seconds from impaling her loved one, and she knew exactly what that meant. It meant death. Many emotions were swirling inside her as she helplessly watched a horrid scene unfold. Anger, sorrow, anguish were the most dominant feelings, along with the feeling of helplessness that made her loathe herself at the moment for letting it happen, but the one feeling that rivaled her helplessness was the feeling of regret. Regret for missing any chance she had to do the thing she wanted the most, to confess her feelings to Issei. When she thought about the chances she had to confess to Issei, chances that would never occur again after the spear will make contact with Issei, she felt broken. She felt like a part of her was slowly starting to fade from her. She forced herself to look at the horrid scene so she could remind herself of her failure to prevent it from happening. She watched with tears, but then, she gasped from the thing that happened next. Yusaka felt dread, horror, anguish, and sorrow when she watched the scene in front of her. She might have known Issei for only a day or so, but the impact the brunette made on her life was more than anyone else but her daughter had made. She found this fact to be weird at first, but as the hours went by it became less and less weird for her as she realized exactly why the impact he made in her life was that severe. His determination, his unwavering will, his confidence, his urge to protect his loved ones no matter the cost. Those were few of the many things that made her be captured by the brunette and made her want to spend the rest of her life with him alongside her newfound friends. "Issei, you promised me," she thought in agony as the promise Issei made last night flashed in her mind. She didn't feel betrayed from the promise breaking, she felt sad because she knew that Issei failed his promise and lost his life because he protected her and Kunu, and the feeling of guilt that realization made she would carry for the rest of her life. She felt like she missed a great chance to have a man whose heart will be big enough to love her, Kunu, Vali, and the rest who she knew carried similar feelings to Issei which she didn't mind. She felt like she missed someone who would be someone Kunu could call father too. And that broke her heart because if there was one thing her daughter deserved the most was to grow up with someone she could call him father. She watched the scene in front of her as the thoughts of what could have been flashed through her mind, but she gasped in utter shock from the thing that happened next. Le Fay watched the one she cherished being mere moments away from being impaled by a spear to his abdomen, tears cascading down her cheeks in a steady flow. For her, Issei was a lot of things, a role model, someone she could rely on no matter the situation, a friend, and with time, she hoped he would be something more than that. Her mind took her back to the fateful promise Issei made her when they met at this very hall for the first time as a team, a promise he swore never to break. The promise to protect her no matter what, even at the cost of his life. Her flow of tears only intensified when she thought about the first time she met him back in Kyoto. How he comforted her without even knowing who she was, how he boosted her delicate confidence with his sincere compliments, and how kindly he treated her, even though he could have just stared at her crying form and instead, continued to walk with his friends and continue his life. For Le Fay, she was like a blooming flower when Issei was the water she needed in order to survive, the water that would strengthen her and help her grow, water that without it, she would most likely cease to exist. That much impact the brunette had on her life, and it baffled her, never in her life she expected something like that to happen. She watched with agony as the spear continued to get closer and closer. She promised to herself at that very moment that if Issei would survive this then no longer she would tell Issei how she feels about him, even if he won't reciprocate those feelings. But, the next thing the blonde wizard saw made her gasp in astonishment. Baroka dreadfully watched Issei being mere seconds from being impaled to death by Cao Cao. She couldn't really comprehend this, but, for her, the boy was someone she considered special. Sure, she had a few boyfriends in her past, some she was more involved with than the others, but none of them were like Issei. No, they were far from being like him. Was it because of that talk? She thought to herself in curiosity as the feeling of dread continued to intensify with each passing second, thinking about the talk she and Issei had after their mission at the Gremory labs, and how he reacted to the things she told him when they were alone. She knew that even though her past boyfriends did listen to her on the rare occasions, she would show genuine emotions instead of her typical teasing, but she knew they listened only because they were interested in having their way with them, which they never had, at least not how they wanted it. The furthest anyone got was to fondle her, and even that only lasted for a few short minutes before she pushed the man off of her and crushed any chance he had to proceed from that point. After all, the boyfriends she had who were pretty much the same, Kuroka lost her faith in men completely and instead resorted to just teasing them for her own and for their dismay. But, when she looked at Issei she saw that he had something that none of them had. He was different, he listened because he cared, and not because he wanted to get into her pants. He comforted her when she needed it and expected nothing in return, and for that, she was more than grateful. As time went by from that talk at the forest, her faith in men has been mostly restored thanks to the brunette, but she was still skeptical about men and their motives. Maybe it was just a good facade. She asked herself a few days after the talk, but with each mission her team went to, she saw Issei's genuine desire to protect her and her team, even at the cost of his life, and that made the doubt she had in her heart to fade away, and instead being replaced with great love to the man who for once cared about her as a person, and not as some busty girl he could get his way with only to dump her afterwards. Issei was a man who carried a pain similar to hers, and because of that, she knew that he was probably the only person who could understand her completely. At this moment, Kuroka realized that Issei was someone she never wanted to be apart with, someone she wanted to stand by his side when he fought valiantly to protect her and his friends. He was someone Kuroka now knew for sure that she loved, and because of that she made herself a promise at the moment, a promise to heal Issei's pain and hopefully be someone he would come to love the same way she loved him. She tried to avert her gaze from the painful scene, but she found herself gasping in utter surprise from the thing that transpired next. It happened so fast. He was fighting with him and then all of a sudden his attack's direction changed abruptly and was heading towards his abdomen, but when he noticed the incoming spear it was already too late for him. Cao Cao used his spear with so much grace that it would have seemed like the boy started training with a spear a day after he came out of his mother's womb, making him snicker sadly in response. Issei took the few seconds he had before the spear impaled him to internally apologize for the people who were watching with agony and sorrow. He hated this, he hated being the reason for their sadness, and it made him seething at the mere thought of that, but he knew that even if he traveled back in time, he wouldn't be able to change the course of actions that led to this event, and thus he couldn't avoid what is seemed to be his imminent death. He braced himself for the pain that would only last a second before he would be enveloped in a blackness that would never disappear. He looked to his side where his friends were, wanting them to be the last sight he would behold. He saw their expressions, and it broke the mess he called a heart even more than it was before. He turned his gaze back at Cao Cao as he couldn't bear to watch his friend's expressions anymore. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for being this weak," Issei told his partner, who he came to consider as his best friend and someone he cared greatly for. Greg didn't answer, and that made Issei quite confused and sad. Is he ashamed that I lost my life in such a way? He thought sadly as to why his partner wouldn't respond. He sighed in sadness before he closed his eyes and embraced himself for the hit, but nothing would have prepared him for the thing that happened next. The next thing Issei knew, he felt a rush of power coursing through his veins, power that felt like blazing flames, making him hiss in pain. But for some reason, he couldn't stop even if he wanted to, even if the pain was too agonizing to bear. Welsh Dragon Crimson Sorrow Drake's voice roared vigorously in the hall, surprising everyone who were present before their eyes widened from what they saw next. They saw Issei, who had his scale mail jewels glowing, holding Cao Cao's spear whose tip already touched his armor with his left hand, while his right hand charged what they think was probably one of the most powerful dragon shots they witnessed. Dragon shot. Issei, whose voice was now a mix between his and Drake, roared as he released his attack on Cao Cao, who couldn't dodge it, sending him crashing into a nearby wall at an unbelievable speed. While everyone had the same line of thought that Drake got involved in this attack in order to stop Issei's death was right, although not entirely right. Issei had complete awareness and control of what he had done, but he also felt a searing urge to do what he did, which he assumed came from Drake. The thing Drake announced was something Issei had never heard before, nor was it mentioned by Drake, and he wondered what the hell it was and how it helped him to avoid what would have been his demise. What the hell was that? Issei asked a dragon in bewilderment, looking for answers before Cao Cao, who he knew survived this attack, would appear again. To put it simply, the boosted gear reacted to your intense emotions of sorrow and fury, as well as my own sorrow for possibly losing you, the best partner I had, and powered you up so you could avoid the thing that caused a burst of emotions in the two of us, Cao Cao's impaling attack. I see, Issei simply replied as he was at a loss for words. You have to know that the toll this power-up took on you was a major one, and I'm afraid that you wouldn't last very long in a fight, now Drake told Issei, who scowled in response to the news Drake delivered. Well then, I have to make every second count, Issei replied, replacing his scowl with a smirk. He averted his gaze towards the place Cao Cao had gone crashing into when he heard the sound of debris being moved around. No one ever had the chance to escape my spear, nor did they have the chance to inflict the damage you caused me, and for that, I must say that I'm very impressed, Issei. I do not wish to fight you anymore because you proved me the distance you'll go to keep your resolve, despite it being against our ideals. I will allow the Yaokai leader and her daughter to stay here without harm, Cao Cao replied with an impressed tone that showed Issei that he was genuinely impressed with him. Making him smile in return from both the compliment and the fact that he wouldn't have to continue fighting him anymore. Issei didn't get to respond because the next thing he knew, he was forced out of his balance breaker and into the floor as the pain from his power-up had started to take its toll on him. His friends came rushing at his side when they saw it and quickly offered any kind of support to the brunette whose eyes were slowly closing down. Don't worry, I'm okay, Issei said weakly before his eyes closed down, making everyone hysterical as they thought the brunette had died, but they soon calmed down when they heard his steady pulse. I guess that attack took a heavy toll on him, Vali said while flashing a big grin at Issei before she and the rest carried him to his room. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow this xBrawlx for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.